Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Mike Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, April the 8th, 2021. Just a reminder that in approximately 90 minutes, I will be discussing Andrew Patterson's film debut, the thrilling The Vast of Night. I'm going to start today talking about, I've called it Suicide Pact. I had a conversation with someone from Alberta on Twitter yesterday about COVID-19 and about lockdowns. And this fellow was keen to set me straight about my errors in this regard. He said, handy that every other type of death stopped when COVID started, and those 26,000 plus Albertans don't need treatment in hospitals that are overcrowded with COVID cases over the last year plus. Nice of cancer, heart disease, car accidents, and everything else to take the year off. I thought that this fellow, Neil, he was making the opposite of the argument that he was making. I took a look at his timeline and realized that he is a zero COVID person. Zero COVID refers to the belief, the utopian belief, that lockdowns, masks, social distancing, endless sanitation of every surface cannot end until COVID has been completely eliminated. It's a wish for entropy. It's the wish for the end of life. I responded to the 26,000 figure is a reference to the 26,268 Albertans who died overall in 2019. Just slightly, very slightly over 2,000 people have died of COVID-19 in the province of Alberta, which has a population of 4.4 million people. I had someone else saying, oh, double the death rate. 2,000 out of 26,000 plus. This is not doubling the death rate. It's not even close to that. But the argument that he was making was somehow lockdowns were responsible for deaths, cancer, heart disease, car accidents, etc. Well, they are, but not in the way that he understands. He said all those conditions are harder to treat when hospitals are overrun. Also, they didn't stop when COVID started. And there is ample evidence all over the world that lockdowns work. I will not argue on this because it is a fact. I responded, what is this? The argument from authority? How many lockdowns are we going to need? 5, 10, 20, forever? When you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. He responded, as many lockdowns as we need to save lives. I, for one, am happy to do my part if it means one less human being will die, either from COVID or from a treatable illness or injury that was ignored because of an overrun medical system. To which I responded, oh, I see, it's the Zero COVID Suicide Pact. Whenever I see the phrase, if it means one less human being will die, I know that I'm dealing with someone who is either not serious, a sentimentalist, or knows nothing about risk management. He responded, I never said no one will die. I've said I'll do my part if one more can live. It's the same reason we wear seatbelts, have gun control, speed limits, laws against drinking and driving, all limits on freedom that aren't even temporary to save lives. To which I responded, you beg the question. There is no evidence whatsoever that lockdowns work. In the meantime, many have died and will continue to die from cancer, stroke, heart attacks, suicide, alcoholism, drug ODs, etc., who would not have if not for the hysteria. I can give you a personal example without going into too much detail. I have a relative who lives in Alberta, and he came a day or two. He was a day or two away from dying because the hospitals in Alberta for several months were closed to all but COVID cases. When he was finally admitted into the hospital last year, it was a close-run thing. Let's put it that way. But what he informed me was that the hospital wards were pretty much empty. because the esteemed health authorities in Alberta and elsewhere decided that their primary job was not to protect the public, but to protect themselves. As I say, empty wards. My brother had a whole ward to himself or one other person in the ward. And this is all because of management, I would say criminal mismanagement and hysteria from the health authorities led in Alberta by Dr. Dina Hinshaw. But I call it a suicide pact because how many people are we willing to let die, continue to die, until we win the battle, win the war against that insidious enemy, that vicious enemy, COVID-19? Well, people die all the time for all sorts of reasons. COVID-19 is no more important than any other disease or condition. But for more than a year now, we have treated it as if it were, and we've paid the price, and we are going to continue to pay the price for this folly for years, years and years. All of the cancer patients who were not diagnosed, to give one example. Furthermore, there are lots of people who are suffering from incipient heart disease, who have cancer, who are terrified to go into hospitals because of the terrible job that hospitals in Canada, in Britain, in the United States have done in protecting people while there from being infected with COVID. People are not even going in for routine medical checkups. They're avoiding doctors wholesale because of the risk that they will be infected. Of course, there's also another risk. That is to say, if they were tested and found to have COVID-19, or it was claimed they had COVID-19 based on tests which have an extraordinarily high rate of false positives, it would mean that they would become, latter-day lepers, even if they never had any symptoms from this. It seems that in the United States, to a large part, the zero COVID utopia has been abandoned. I mean, okay, you can't argue with Florida and Texas and their results, or in South Dakota or with their results. But in Canada, especially, the media has embraced panic porn with a passion. We must extirpate COVID-19. Yes, and all of the deadly variants. No, that is simply not possible. This is not the way that respiratory viruses have been handled in the past. And for some reason, perhaps the need of health officials to appear important, or to be important, to become omnipotent, for politicians to be seen that they are doing something, anything, and for the media, which of course is looking for clicks, especially in the United States after Donald Trump left office. Yes, listen to the experts, they tell us. Well, the experts' advice has been, although authoritative, has been all over the place right from the very beginning. Someone called Lufuk responded to me. First, there was no need for masks. Then masks were only when we couldn't social distance. Now they're required all the time. First lockdown was to flatten the curve to make sure hospitals weren't overrun. Endless lockdowns might actually be helping mutations become more virulent. But there comes a point when empirical evidence cannot be ignored. And thankfully, I think that we have almost reached that stage in a great humiliation for my country of Canada, which likes to see itself, especially since Trump is so much more clever and sensible than the United States. Our death rates are looking to surpass theirs. From CNN, Madeline Holcomb and Dakin Andone, the number of new COVID-19 cases has plateaued at a disturbingly high level, and the U.S. is at risk from a new surge, Dr. Anthony Fauci warned Wednesday. While lower than the peak earlier this year, there were still more than 61,000 new cases reported on Wednesday, according to data from Johns Hopkins University. And the lack of continued significant decreases in infections is a concern, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, that's Fauci, told CNN's Anderson Cooper. It's almost a race between getting people vaccinated and this surge that seems to want to increase, Fauci said. Yes, this would be a first in history. An enormous spike in a respiratory disease in spring, summer? I'm getting the impression that soon enough, Dr. Fauci is going to be rather like Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard, that he is going to be living in a gloomy mansion somewhere, and he will be reduced to saying, I am big. It's the diseases that got small. And then finally, as he descends down the staircase, he will put on an actorly face and say, I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. Biden. And here's a story from Study Finds. Everything the experts say is right, except when they change their minds. For instance, surfaces. Surfaces are deadly. The virus can live on surfaces for 9 days. Oh my God, it's not only people we have to be deathly afraid of, it's everything we touch. Several months ago, as reported on this live stream, the experts very quietly started saying, that's not actually true about the surfaces. Your chance of getting COVID from a surface, when looking at all COVID cases, about less than 1 in 10,000. And yet these same experts scared us to death. Masks, they said masks, they don't work. They didn't work during the Spanish flu, and they won't work now. At the very beginning, no need to worry about it. By all means, go to your Chinese New Year festivities. The real enemy is xenophobia, racism. Nevertheless, despite all of the bungling by the experts, and they're repeatedly telling us that no, just one more lockdown, just one more lockdown. Yeah, we're going to need another lockdown or circuit breaker or whatever you call it. And let's check this out. I saw that Dollarama was trending on Twitter, and I thought, why would that be? What's the point of Dollarama even being open, says Emily Giroux. This is referring to the province of Ontario and its new restriction. And only essential articles, even in stores that have been allowed to be open, like Dollarama, are allowed to be sold. This is apparently they saw the headlines from this nonsense in Wales and other places where, no, we're going to rope this area off. No, we're going to rope this area off. Here are some of the non-essential items that can't be bought from Dollarama. School supplies, office supplies, crafts, linens, clothing, home decor, glassware, closet and bathroom, jewelry, hair accessories, artificial flowers, books, toys, seasonal candles, kitchen. Yeah. So it's not only that the experts have decided which businesses are essential and non-essential, they're micromanaging this. Yeah. School supplies, office supplies, clothing. Clothing's not essential. Everybody knows that. Supplies to clean your bathroom? No, that's not essential at all. I thought we were all in favor of ultra cleanliness. But getting back to the subject of misinformation, This is from Study Finds by John Anderer. Since the start of the pandemic, misinformation, conspiracy theories, and falsehoods about COVID-19 have been running rampant. According to researchers from McGill University, America isn't just a COVID hot zone, it's a breeding ground for bad info. Their study claims Americans are super spreaders of COVID misinformation and warns that the U.S. infodemic is heading to Canada next. So people who disagree with the narrative, which is pretty much fallen apart at this point, are diseased. Where have we heard that rhetoric before? Study authors posit that Canadians who are active on social media are more likely to encounter misleading coronavirus headlines. They also end up believing at least one or two of these stories and start telling their friends and family. Oh, we can't have that. Unfortunately, it has already started. Despite the Canadian media and government's best efforts, yay, Canadian media, yay, Canadian government, they're never wrong about anything. Many Canadians already believe various COVID conspiracies and unreliable claims. This study strongly indicates this is at least partially due to heavy U.S. media and content consumption up north. A lot of Canadians are struggling to understand COVID-19 denialism and anti-vaccination attitudes among their loved ones, says lead author, study author and PhD candidate Angus Bridgman in a university release. Did he make this statement before or after the Canadian government restricted the usage of the AstraZeneca vaccine? Researchers analyzed the online behavior of Canada's 200,000 most active Twitter users for this project. They also distributed a survey gauging Canadian news consumption habits and beliefs about COVID-19. In Canada, yay, Canada, politicians and pundits on both sides of the political spectrum have largely put their differences aside to focus on controlling and ending the pandemic. Isn't that sweet? In Canada, the politicians and the pundits have all decided that there can only be one point of view on this vast topic, which is COVID-19 and its control. No, we wouldn't want to have any kind of free inquiry and discussion. No, that's just not the Canadian way. In America, researchers say the situation is much different. The study finds the U.S. is so polarized right now, politicians and media figures actively work to undermine their ideological rivals at every turn. Yeah, that's what they call politics. All of this tension creates an environment in which it's incredibly easy to push information that tells one desired narrative, regardless of the truth. How about this narrative that the media never steers you wrong? Or how about this even more important one? The government, and more importantly, government health bureaucrats are never wrong. It's hard for Canadian journalists, scientists, and public health experts to be heard by the average Canadian, given all the noise generated by American sources, Bridgman explains. Is he kidding us? If you go into a restaurant, anywhere in this country, no matter what kind it is, fast food place, there will be a screen with some public health, some latrine walla, or some premier saying, yes, another lockdown. Unfortunately, we have no choice, but just give us 15 days, et cetera, et cetera. And what you get from the media, as expressed above, is there is one single narrative allowed in my country. Now, strangely, this story, which cites an article in the journal Frontiers in Political Science, it does not mention any particular misinformation about COVID. Yes, masks works, lockdown works, social distancing works, sanitation works. Oh, wait, we've already been told that the use of heavy-duty antiseptics to constantly clean everything in sight, well, that was based on false information. False information that served to terrorize everyone in North America for a year. Let's go to the chat. Hello to our valiant moderator, Chad Chadson. Thank you for your service. To Doranal, Don from Beyond, Dan, Popcasso 88, Buddy William Hicks, Yo Mama. Pitsky says, what's your favorite Billy Joel song? I do not have a favorite Billy Joel song. I cannot abide Billy Joel. That's that song, Just the Way You Are. Is that supposed to be a romantic song? Because it is one of the most patronizing songs that I've ever heard. He's saying basically, you're not much, but I'll live with it. Women like to be complimented, Billy. Maybe that's the reason you've been so unsuccessful with them over the years, despite being one of the biggest selling record artists in history. Buddy says, despite our local mask mandate just being lifted, stores are keeping their mask policy and folks are gladly complying. Whenever I go to Shaw, which is my internet service provider, to pay my bill, two people come out in masks and interview everyone. Have you left the country within this period? Are you showing symptoms of this, that, or the other? And they let people into their stores, one or two at a time, with all these people lined up outside. I thought we were over that. But in some cases, not. Chocokin 666 says, you are not a product of your environment. Your environment is a product of you. You know who you are. Well, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, I'd say. But we are all children of the zeitgeist. No question about that. Glib Medley says, I took Kay's advice to get more sun. Bike from the far side of the Williamsburg Bridge to Union Square, wearing nothing but a pair of shorts and a bandana over my face. Yes, the sun is good for you. Well, in moderation. Walrus Libertarian says, COVID hysteria is incurable. William Hicks says, the CDC says racism is a health crisis. Yes, indeed. It also says that climate change is a health crisis. Don't they have enough to occupy themselves without that? Hello to random number generator. GSP says fighting COVID-19 is like fighting Hitler. Yes, indeed. Don from Beyond says, I just ignore those signs posted in many stores, masks required, and breeze right in. I urged a guy entering the store who was putting on a mask, don't do it. He said, gotta follow the rules. Hello to Professor Paul. Brandon Smith says, luckily crazy people are allowed to speak their minds so we can positively identify who they are. Hello to G's Heestall and Hikma Warrior. Pelpcasso 88 says, can't wait for Kevin's review of Go. Such a fantastic movie. Yes, very, very amusing, I must say. Hikma Warrior says, I got the Pfizer vax 2 days ago. 0 after effects, just like any flu shot. I understand it's the second shot, which is normally more troublesome. Cecil Henry says, there are lots of suicidal and depressed people from this tyranny. I see it in every generation, from school kids, university students, elderly. Will the COVID situation be worse or better this time next year? Asked Brandon Smith. Well, my usual proviso that I'm not very good at short-term predictions. I could have hardly imagined, last March that we'd be here where we are today with people going on about mutant variants and biological Fukushima. They're enjoying it. That's something to understand. A lot of people are enjoying it. The Karens very much are enjoying it. They would have liked to install such a regime their whole lives, and now they're finally getting a chance to do it. Cecil Henry says, a friend of my father's phoned just to talk and sounded so depressed it was hard to tell who it was. This is from a very cheerful guy, but he, like so many, take it all so passively, so passive. GC Stahl says, as the experts lock down Ontario again, I started to take my patio furniture out from storage so I can hide in my backyard. Random number generator says, I'm starting to believe more and more that food in the U.S. is so poisonous that it has killed the spirit of most people. Hormone levels, toxins. There was another story that someone sent to me about from this, what study finds about people becoming addicted to food. Well, I don't like this word addiction, as Thomas Saz pointed out with regard to all of the drugs which have come out over the last 100 years, which were, this one's not addictive. If people like to take any drug, it will become addictive. In the same way that if people like to perform any action, it will become addictive. But the bigger question, which this story didn't investigate, I understand Tucker Carlson was talking about this recently, is that food scientists have been engineering food, I don't know, for a couple of decades now, so that you always want to eat through the use of high fructose corn syrup and the like. The replacement of fat, which makes you feel full, with sugar, where you never feel full. MF Superstar says Jordan Peterson is the supervillain in a Marvel comic book written by Tennessee Coates. Milo Greek name, hardest hit. Is this true? Yeah. I understand. Food, comfort food. People feel miserable, and they eat more than they should. And then they feel guilty about that, so they eat some more. Random number generator says half the population would be bending over. Okay, I'm not going to talk that. Yeah. Cecil Henry says it's all a Truman Show. People believe whatever is droned on TV for 4 hours a night. We are dancing for illusory ghosts and pretending it's real to legitimize the complicity. It's shocking. Turn TV off. Well, apparently we're watching less TV and certainly less network TV than we were 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. I mean, we've seen the increasing popularity of channels, both on your 500 cable universe and streaming channels, in which there is no news or public affairs whatsoever. Brandon Smith says, I bet in 5 and 10 years, the virus situation is even worse than before. Well, I can confidently state that cannot happen because the economies of the world would have all collapsed long before that time. Metal Mike says the COVID cases are in schools, warehouses, and manufacturing plants, not in small metal operations. So they close small retail operations and leave warehouses and manufacturing open. Logical. Alpicasso 88 says special exemption for Snickers. Doug Ford needs to eat. Well, if Doug Ford sincerely wanted to set an example for his fellow Ontarians, he would lose, 60, 80, 100 pounds. He is not a healthy person. Look at his brother, how young he was when he died. And Ford is one of those people who, if he gets COVID, is in big trouble. Frothing Fanboy says around Christmas, we could buy emergency candles at the dollar store, but not Christmas-type candles, sitting right next to them on the shelf. Don Willis, just a few more lockdowns until the government has you believe we are your only option. We know stimmy checks are inflationary, says Adam, but lockdowns were deflationary, weren't they? Yeah, we're being softened up for universal basic income, aren't we? Because we've already been told that a very large swath of us are non-essential. So why should we ever need jobs? He Style says Ontario is insane. What will Canadian Tire and Home Depot rope off from access? Probably plumbing, knowing my luck, when something breaks. Okay. Anne Run says, wait, just slipped off the screen there. What did thought on Hall & Oates, KMG? Probably you hate them, but I love their catchy tunes and absence of pretension. It's not my thing, but they're very good at what they do. Daryl Hall made an album with Robert Fripp, in the late 1970s, that RCA Records refused to release because his management, Tommy Mottola, thought that getting involved, with the art crowd would hurt his career. You can find it You can find it on Robert Fripp solo album. It's good stuff, actually. I seem to have lost what Anrun said for Air Supply. Now you're taunting me. Now you are taunting me. Favorite REM? Okay, REM. The old cliche. I like their early records. Yes, I did. When I was talking about producers a couple of weeks ago, and I forgot to mention this anecdote that Joe Boyd, who was the producer of Nick Drake and the first producer of the Syd Barrett Pink Floyd, Peter Buck, the guitarist for REM, was a Nick Drake fan long time ago, long before it was trendy. And he was keen to have Joe Boyd produce an REM record, one of the ones they did for IRS, which he did. And afterwards, he was asked about it. And I guess Joe Boyd's a pretty honest fellow. He said that he was disappointed with the record because the level of musicianship in that band was not what he was used to. Have you ever seen that the Yacht Rock series on YouTube? It's absolutely hilarious. Hall & Oates are in it. And Oates is this swaggering, tough guy. He was always looking to punch people, And there's this one particular line which is directed at the object of one of their most famous songs. He sneers. John Oates sneers. "What are you going to do, Sarah? Smile?" MF Superstar says B-52 say we're not the best band in Athens, GA. It's REM, and nobody knew who that was. B-52s, before they got woke, were certainly a lot more fun than REM. I think that their first two records are just tremendous. And then Ricky died, of course. But that comeback album that they made, in 1988, the one with all the hits on it, I think that is tremendous, too. I see that I'm not going to talk about that. Let's go to Lockdown Skeptics. Let's wrap this up quickly. Many academics are doing incredibly well out of lockdown. Yes, how about that? They are essential, but so many of us are not. March death rate in Scotland is among lowest for 50 years. Of course, there's lots of reasons for that. I was too risk averse on church closures in first lockdown, says Justin Welby. More than 6 million Britons fully vaccinated against COVID. How much loss of life was due to COVID-19 in 2020 compared to other diseases? For an original piece by an engineer called Paul Bird, where he looks at the total loss of life due to COVID in 2020 in England and Wales. He's done that by working out the average life expectancy within each population cohort, calculating the average loss of life among those who died, involving co-ed in each cohort, and then producing a sum total, 814,264 years of life lost. He then tries to put that number in context. It is difficult to relate to numbers like these. What do they mean? Clearly, the overall size of the population is important. The impact of 100,000 people dying, for whatever reason, in a country of 1 million is rather more serious than in a country of 100 million. The population of England and Wales in 2019 was just over 59 million, so 814,000 plus lost life years is equivalent to 0.014 life years per person, or 5 days. Again, that figure is difficult to relate to. No one wants to lose even 1 day of his or her life. However, the statistic does give the possibility of comparison with other things, such as the life lost to diseases and lifestyle choices we are more familiar with. It also provides a way to gauge the proportionality of lockdown. Yes, it's all about proportionality, and that concept has been thrown out of the window by our arrogant latrine wallahs and their cringing supposed masters. How do the collateral harms of lockdown, which everyone is having to endure, compare to the lifetime saved by lockdown? This time of writing, it is not clear how many COVID deaths were saved by lockdown in 2020. Initial work on international comparisons suggests none at all. In strictly numerical terms, how does the time period 5 days compare to average life expectancy of 81.25 years? Interestingly enough, the average age of life in Alberta, one of the few provinces in Canada, I think the only one who is making this information available, is 81 years. One way of visualizing it would be to take a piece of string 1 meter long representing 81.25 years and cut off a piece representing the lifetime loss to COVID averaged over the whole population. How long would the offcut be? If you've been closely following the BBC's coverage, you might reason as follows. Well, hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives to COVID, and there are millions of people in the country, so maybe I guess the offcut would be a 10 centimeters. That dedicated viewer would be wrong. The actual length of string corresponding to 5 days is 168 micrometers. That is less than a fifth of a millimeter, a bit thicker than a human hair. Frederick Forsyth has written a stinging letter published in Tuesday's Telegraph, linking the scare tactics employed to frighten East Berliners into supporting the Berlin Wall to those employed by the British government to ensure compliance with COVID regulations. His letter is written in response to an article published by the Telegraph last week on the covert tactics used by the government to scare the public into staying at home. Forsyth says that is what is happening today. I have only once before seen anything like it. This is when I was posted to East Germany in 1962. Such a brainwashing tactic was employed to frighten East Berliners into believing that the Berlin Wall was a defensive measure to protect them from tiny West Berlin, and that the Stasi was their guardian. The wall was, of course, an instrument of enslavement. I never thought that the government of a country whose uniform I once wore with such pride would sink so low. Those responsible should be identified without delay and ousted from all office over us. Online retail profits soar while High Street suffers. Yes. Deaths in England and Wales now 5% below the 5-year average. But apparently that's not good enough. Lord Jonathan Sumption in the Telegraph delivers a blistering attack on Sage's garbage COVID models and the ever-changing position of the goalposts for exiting lockdown. The projection which has attracted the most attention was surely designed to is that on pessimistic but plausible assumptions, there will be a third wave in the summer if the restrictions are eased, leading to hospitalizations as bad as at the January peak. Does that seem odd? It should. The January peak reflected the situation before vaccinations took effect. So we're being told that it is plausible to think that the vaccines may make little difference to hospitalizations. When Imperial College produced its modeling report last March, which pushed the government into the first lockdown, they pointed out that unless restrictions were kept in place until there was a vaccine, infections and associated hospitalizations and deaths would simply surge again once the restrictions were lifted. The goalposts are now being shifted. We are being told that restrictions may have to be kept in place even though there are now highly effective vaccines. Hospitalizations and deaths are at rock bottom. Almost all of the more vulnerable groups have been vaccinated. Even accounting for the changed advice regarding the AstraZeneca vaccine, a high proportion of the rest will have been inoculated by June. If the vaccine is not an exit route, then what is? The logic of the modelers' more extreme projections is that the restrictions may have to stay in place indefinitely. Tell your local Conservative candidate in the May 6th elections you won't vote for them if the government brings in vaccine passports. Well, in Alberta, 16 caucus members of the ruling party have pretty much risen up in rebellion openly against Premier Jason Kenney. And finally, we will wrap this up with Alex Berenson's Twitter feed. Want real-world evidence that vaccine side effect databases do not capture anything close to the real number of adverse events, even extremely serious ones? Britain has a similar system similar to VAEERs with voluntary reporting of post-vaccine side effects. Just a week ago, the British reported 30 cases of severe blood clotting problems, including 7 deaths after 18 million doses of AstraZeneca. This is a very serious and unusual problem. Yesterday, the Brits updated the number. Now they report 79 events and 19 deaths out of 20 million doses, a near tripling of events and deaths in a week. Did all those extra problems happen in the last week with 2 million doses? No. They're coming now because physicians are finally looking for and reporting them. But if a voluntary reporting system can't catch more than a fraction of cases like this, cases where young people are dying bizarrely days after getting vaccinated, what are the odds it will pick up the deaths of older people dying in more routine ways, like strokes? Dara Cass, MD, physician, mom, wife and daughter, native Brooklynite, of course, says adults who are vaccinated still need to keep their kids safe, which means date night for the vaccinated parents is a great time to eat indoors, but family meals at restaurants should still be outside. Berenson comments, remind me what we're keeping kids safe from again. Contact with the outside world, I would suspect, and I'm only half joking there. Apparently, the world is too much of a frightening place for children, and they should be shielded from it at all cost. Strange things happening in Belfast, Northern Ireland. This is from The Guardian today. Police use water cannon on rioters in 7th night of unrest. Gangs of youths gathered near the scene of Wednesday night's violence and hurled stones and fireworks at the police. Rioters have been blasted by a water cannon by police as unrest stirred. Once again, after calls for calm this week, violence again flared up on the streets of West Belfast Thursday. Stones and fireworks were thrown at police by gangs of youths gathered on the nationalist Springfield Road, close to where riots took place on Wednesday night. The Justice Minister, Naomi Long, issued a fresh call for an end to the violence after what she called depressing and reckless scenes on Thursday. She tweeted, more attacks on police, this time from nationalist youths, utterly reckless and depressing to see more violence at interface areas tonight. I don't know what an interface area is. Can anyone help me out there? So what's going on here? This is a piece today from the Daily Express in London. Ireland, both the Northern Territory and the Republic, has historically been plagued by violence and wars known as the Troubles. The riots have been going on for 6 nights in the Northern Ireland capital Belfast, with the Police Federation saying 7 officers were injured. The Northern Ireland executive held an emergency meeting on Thursday morning to discuss the disorderly conduct that kicked off on Good Friday, a historically significant day for Northern Ireland's peaceful resolution. Well, you could put it that way. Another way you could put it is that the British government forced Ireland to surrender to the Irish Republican Army at the behest of the United States of America. The Express explains, loyalists in the country are angry at the new trading arrangements under a mechanism known as the Northern Ireland Protocol. Northern Ireland stayed in the European Union's single market following the Brexit divorce, meaning customs checks are needed on goods entering Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK. This move effectively created a border in the middle of the Irish Sea in an effort to stop a hard border on land, an essential aspect of the Good Friday peace deal that brought an end to decades of violence between loyalists loyal to the UK and Republicans who want a united Ireland. The trading arrangements have caused some unforeseen disruption to trading in food supplies plants and online deliveries. Rather more important, however, loyalists believe the new rules cut Northern Ireland adrift from the rest of the UK, thereby threatening their British identity. Well, if Northern Ireland is still part of the EU, then how is it part of the United Kingdom as well? This is a farce, and it can't be kept up for much longer. Northern Ireland's fate was effectively sealed with the Good Friday Agreement, and I think that it's time for England to cut its ties with Northern Ireland and with Scotland as well. They're simply millstones around its neck. As for Wales, Wales has been joined at the hip with England for about 900 years, and I expect that should it come down to it, they would choose to stay. This happens all the time in stories in the Daily Mail. What happens, I'll get to in just a minute. Here's the headline. Care worker was attacked in no-go zone plagued by crack dealers. Father, 46, left fighting for life, was assaulted in park that locals refused to visit at night as he raced to save 11-year-old son from mob of bullying teenagers. Bullying teenagers, eh? Well, that's rather vague. And where the comments would be on this story, it says, sorry, we are currently not accepting comments on this article, which tells you all you need to know about those so-called bullying teenagers. Let us go back to the chat. Cecil Henry says there's one single narrative allowed on every subject in fake free Canada, from immigration, race, taxation, climate change, to religion, to big government. The MSM has the answers, so shut up. Yes, indeed. When the Vancouver Sun last year published an opinion piece from a fellow who said that there was too much diversity in Canada, and diversity caused all manner of problems. There was just shrieking heard across the land. The Sun removed the op-ed from the internet, too late to remove it from the printed editions, and apologized and apologized and apologized again. And everyone else in the media said, the Vancouver Sun has not apologized enough. What can it do to stop this happening again? Oh, you mean what can the Vancouver Sun do to make sure that no dissenting voices on the subjects of immigration, diversity, multiculturalism are ever allowed in its pages? MF Superstar says Germany should have kept their wall, stayed two countries. I suspect there's many people in the East who agree with that now. Media Hit says Ireland was 100% white, now 80%. Is it really that bad today? MS Superstar says East Germany today would be led by an Orban. I think that you are true about that. Okay, we got anything else here? A great docu about East German junkies in a housing estate. Can't remember its name, says Chogakin 666. I don't know when I will see it, speaking of documentaries, but this year, 2021, is the 50th anniversary of the release of the first Sparks album, which is eponymous, which was originally called Half Nelson, which was their original name. The record company didn't like it. Too wrestling, they said. And Edgar Wright, the acclaimed director of Shaun vs. the Dead, Hot Fuzz, etc., has made a star-studded documentary about Sparks, which I very much look forward to. And also a film that the Bale brothers have written, directed by Leos Carax, the acclaimed French director, and starring Adam Driver and Marion Cotillard, is about to be released this year. Banner year for Sparks. They placed another record in the British top 10 this year, which is really quite an accomplishment. Hickman Warrior says there was a Marxist bookstore on the Karl Marx Alley. I bought a slim treatise. Okay. Okay. I saw the replacements open for REM at a small club in Boston, says Glib Medley. Adam says, seems like Kate Pearson should have had a big solo career, but it didn't materialize. But she was mostly a hairdo. I don't think that's fair. Both talented singers. Indeed. Mesopotamia, B-52s produced by David Byrne. That did not work out. It worked out so badly that it was supposed to be an album, and the recording sessions were abandoned, and it was put out as an EP, and EPs don't sell. Okay. Let's talk about Hunter Biden. The question is, who's protecting Hunter Biden? Hunter Biden has a book out. It's a heroic tale of blah, blah, blah. Joe Biden talks about his great admiration for his son, Hunter Biden. Look, come on. Parents don't like generally to say bad things about their children, especially in public. But Joe Biden had his son, Beau. He was the hero kid. Look, in families with several children, one of them is going to be a dud. And Hunter Biden is the dud. But no, he's not at all. He was crucified by the media. The media, the same media that after the New York Post came up with its blockbuster story about him, when Tucker Carlson had a blockbuster story about him and his father and their business dealings, the rest of the media said, Russian disinformation, don't talk about this. And the rest of the media complied. This is from Josh Boswell at the Daily Mail. Hunter Biden's tell-all autobiography promised the unvarnished story of his struggles with drugs, family turmoil, and his controversial love life. Oh, that's one way to put it, committing incest. But there were many shocking details of his debauched life that the president's son chose not to share with readers, including details of his fragile relationship with his father. Now the Daily Mail can reveal the secrets Hunter chose not to divulge, exposed in the contents of his abandoned laptop and verified by top forensics experts. The bombshell cache of 103,000 text messages, 154,000 emails, more than 2,000 photos, and dozens of videos are packed with revelations conveniently missing from the memoir, including how he begged his father to run for president in 2019 to salvage Hunter's own reputation, how he repeatedly dodged police action against him, despite constantly dealing with drug pushers and prostitutes and having multiple run-ins with law enforcement. Hunter was guarded by a Secret Service agent while on a 2018 drug and prostitute binge in Hollywood, despite not being entitled to protection at the time and amid denials from the federal agency. Joe Biden was afraid his text conversations with Hunter were being hacked, even as they discussed his White House bid. Now Hunter's laptop is brimming with evidence of apparent criminal activity by Hunter and his associates, including drug trafficking and prostitution. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe this Matt Gaetz case has something to do with this in the terms of deflection. I'll talk about Matt Gaetz a little later. I haven't spoken about it previously. I've tried to live by the words of Anthony Burgess, who said, I cannot form opinions without data. Oh, yeah, that's a very unfortunate picture that Hunter Biden took. Oh, there's another. Oh, man, that's a very unfortunate picture. I would kind of think that if you're going to be taking these pictures of yourself or of others, there's a reasonable assumption that this material is going to be leaked, either by you or by someone else. In a presidential debate in October, Joe Biden referred to the leaks of Hunter's emails as, quote, a bunch of garbage. But in an interview with CBS to promote his new book, Beautiful Things, instead of the obvious title, Such Depravity, Hunter said the laptop could be his. There could be a laptop out there that was stolen from me. It could be that I was hacked. It could be that it was Russian intelligence. It could be that it was stolen from me, or there was a laptop stolen from me. He sounds kind of nervous there, doesn't he? Okay. What is this? There's an interesting message here. Well, Dad, I guess you were right if I didn't say anything or just show how Kathleen was a greedy, lascivious, scorned LOL art, or make clear that I was never with Haley until a year after Beau. Haley was his sister-in-law, and Beau is his dead brother who had been married to Haley. Or any of that would all just go away like that genius Kate and the rest said it would. Well, having made clear to the world that the only reason for not running iOS your family problems, I'm glad to be the effing bullseye you painted on my back. You get the impression that Hunter Biden may have been blackmailing his father? Because I kind of get that impression. Among the 103,000 plus text messages on the hard drive dating from 2016 to March 2019 are fraught conversations between President Joe Biden and his son. The text reveals how Joe was sucked into his son's torrid love life, became a punching bag for Hunter's drug-fueled rants, and paid his grandchildren's bills when Hunter had drained his bank account from his spending on prostitutes and crack cocaine. When the former Delaware senator was elected Veep in 2008, put an end to Hunter's lucrative career as a lobbyist to avoid the appearance of conflicts of interest. Hunter then embarked on a series of controversial business ventures and fell into a cycle of crack and prostitute binges, scandal, and rehab. By 2019, his text appeared to be seething with resentment. Yes, and I read one of those seething emails. Your team just made me the uncontrollable, troubled tax cheat philanderer, sex and drug addict that you tried so hard to fix, but couldn't. They totally wrote my life away. If you don't run, I'll never have a chance at redemption. Oh dear. Yeah, there's also this question exactly when Hunter Biden got involved with sister-in-law Haley. Oh God, another very unfortunate picture there from Hunter Biden. Why are you taking a picture of yourself in a jockstrap wearing sunglasses? Oh yeah, drugs. Could it be that Hunter Biden is being propped up, including by a major American publisher, by all the rest of the news media, except the New York Post and Fox News, because of the fear that if the Hunter Biden story unravels, that Joe Biden is finished, or that if it had unraveled before the election, that Joe Biden would never have been elected? I mean, I've never heard of a story before where a president of the United States was carried over the finish line in order to protect a criminal drug addict man who committed incest. Never heard that one before, but life is full of surprises, particularly these days. From Caitlin Polance at CNN, Capitol riot defendant flips to help prosecutors against Proud Boys. At least one of the Capitol riot defenders has flipped against the Proud Boys, agreeing to provide information that could allow the Justice Department to bring an even more severe charge against the group's leadership, according to an attorney involved in the case. Yes, as I've said before, it's feds all the way down. Again, from the Daily Mail, feds investigate whether Matt Gaetz engaged in sex trafficking when he took a trip to Bahamas with marijuana entrepreneur who hired escorts to join them. Federal investigators' alleged interest in Matt Gaetz's Bahamas trip was reported by CBS News Wednesday. Sources Gaetz took the trip to the Bahamas with marijuana entrepreneur Dr. Jason Pirazzolo in late 2018 or early 2019. Pirazzolo paid for the travel expenses and female escorts, the sources said. Investigators are allegedly looking to whether the escorts were illegally trafficked across state or international lines for the purpose of sex with Gaetz. You know, they could have got Tiger Woods for that, you know. Reading about the Tiger Woods scandal years ago, I learned the existence of a job classification called, what was it called? Pussy Wrangler. Yes. Here's how it works. A woman scouts shopping malls and the like, and approaches young women and says, a bunch of famous people, a bunch of rich men, real nice rich men, are having a party in Las Vegas or Palm Springs or something like that. And how would you like to go? We'll pay all your expenses. You get a nice trip for free. Oh, what do you have to do with these men? Well, you don't have to do anything with these men. Any arrangements that you might make with these men, that's none of our business. That's solely up to you. Doesn't that sound, it kind of sounds like a violation of the Mann Act to me. But I was blindsided by this story because it seemed fairly obvious to me that Matt Gaetz is a homosexual. I'm reading from Wikipedia here. Despite the, not just the gay face, just the 1,000-watt gay face. I'm reading from Wikipedia here. In June 2020, following an argument with then Representative Cedric Richmond, Gaetz said he had been living with a 19-year-old immigrant from Cuba, Nestor Galban, since Galban was 12 and considered Nestor his son. He later clarified that Galban is the brother of an ex-girlfriend of Gaetz, and that Galban spends time with his sister, with Gaetz's family, and with Gaetz. The two are not related genetically or legally. Gaetz said, "Our relationship as a family is defined by our love for each other, not by any paperwork." In 2016, he called Galban a local student. In 2017, he called him my helper. In December 2020, Gaetz announced his engagement to his girlfriend, Ginger Lucky, the sister of Oculus VR founder and major Republican donor, Palmer Luckey. Can you see the connection there to Hunter Biden? Oh, this stuff about Hunter Biden. Yeah, and the incest. And, Hunter Biden got married. He did? Yeah, he got married to a woman from South Africa. Really? South Africa, you say? How long has he known this woman? 10 days. Yeah, because that's what normal people do. It's not as if, his father said, "Look, son, you have to get married now." Who do I get married to? Don't worry. We'll work something out, which is what I suspect happened in that case. But apparently this isn't just about sex trafficking or underage girls or nude photos or a loving relationship between a Floridian and a 12-year-old Cuban boy. Espionage is involved. Oh, yes, I asked for $25 million from Matt Gaetz' father, but no, that wasn't blackmail. I was just looking for a gift. Michelle Malkin has weighed in with on this. Two things can be true. Gaetz may well have engaged in vile behavior, perhaps even worse and more sordid than what has been alleged so far. And two, Israel/Mossad is at work using all of the involved Beltway and Florida figures as honeypot puppets on a much grander theatrical stage, as they have done in the past and continue to do in the present. I don't know what specifically the aim is here, drawing the U.S. into war with Iran, something to do with Ukraine, Russia, who the hell knows? Yes, pattern recognition is fundamental. The second most important takeaway is to recruit and promote a better generation of upright, disciplined, unblackmailable America First politicians and leaders. Otherwise, it will be business as usual in this spook-infested America Last swamp. What about Donald Trump? The whole world knew about Donald Trump. Gaetz was a little different. Dennis Hastert was a little different. Ron Unz came up with a hypothesis a few years, which I think is almost certainly true, that the Republican Party and probably the Democratic Party as well, certain people are talent spotted at an early age, and they are talent spotted because of their depravity, which means we have this information about you, and you belong to me now. We'll let you have a political career. We'll help you out in your political career, but these are the positions you will take, and those are the positions you will never take, and you know why you will never take them. Let's talk about the Derek Chauvin case. And Coulter has a column yesterday called Minneapolis versus the Evidence. Apparently, no one is watching the trial of Derek Chauvin. Otherwise, the media couldn't get away with their spectacular lying to the public about how the prosecution is killing it. I think she means killing it in the sense of doing a bad job. In the popular vernacular, killing it from comedy circles means doing excellently. She continues, it's quite the opposite. In fact, in less than a week, the prosecution's theory of the crime has subtly shifted from murder to fail to provide what we would say in retrospect would be a full and complete duty of care during the 1 to 3 minute interval between Floyd's resisting the police to his dying as a hostile crowd screamed obscenities at the police officers. The defense hasn't even begun to make its case, but the prosecution's witnesses keep helping them. The only exception to the wild media lying is headline news, where the lawyer commentators go the extra mile by watching the trial. Week 1 was chock-a-block with weeping bystanders wailing about how they felt watching Chauvin restrain Floyd. This would be a tremendous evidence if the charge against Officer Chauvin was first-degree upsetting bystanders, but that's not the charge. That's not even a crime. One especially distraught witness, Charles McMillan, an elderly black man, testified to seeing foam coming out of Floyd's mouth. Quiz: is foam coming out of the mouth a sign of A, head wound, B, strangulation, or C, a drug overdose? Answer: C, a drug overdose. Apart from that crucial fact, McMillan's evidence only pertained to first-degree upsetting bystanders, which, again, is not a crime. My favorite witness, and the media's favorite too, was Genevieve Hansen, feminist hero. She appeared in court in her firefighter dress uniform and a belligerent mood, though not as belligerent as the day Floyd died, when she showed up in sweats and started shrieking at the officers. The headlines are along the lines of firefighter. I could have saved Floyd's life, but police wouldn't let me. Apparently, Genevieve would have invented a time machine, gone back, and stopped Floyd from ingesting 3 times the lethal dose of fentanyl. I take it back. Chubby girls make the best firefighters. Don't get snippy with me. It's beyond outrageous that fire departments have abandoned all physical fitness requirements solely in order to hire more women. According to Genevieve, the police on the scene unaccountably refused to step aside and take direction from her, despite her 1 full year of experience as a firefighter. Genevieve was totally on top of the situation. In her statement to investigators shortly after the event, she described Floyd as a small, slim man. Floyd was at least 6'4" and weighed 230 pounds. The largest police officer on the scene was Chauvin, coming in at 5'9" and 140 pounds. Genevieve missed nothing. Even in the calm setting of a courtroom with no agitated bystanders yelling at her, here are the things Genevieve says she would have done to save Floyd's life. In order, I would have requested additional help. Well, Chauvin did that. I would have asked someone to call 911. I would have asked someone to run to the gas station and look for a defibrillator. Why didn't the officers think to call for medical backup? Oh yeah, they already had twice, starting about 10 minutes before Genevieve even showed up. I would have checked his airway. I would have worried about a spinal cord injury. As we know from the autopsy, there was no problem with Floyd's airway or spinal cord. But as long as you bring it up, his body did contain 3 times the lethal dose of fentanyl. I would have checked for a pulse. Eureka! Why didn't... Oh, wait, the officers had done this repeatedly, as several bystander witnesses had already confirmed. By now, Floyd was dead. That's when she would have started chest compressions. So Genevieve, the state's star witness on what the cops did wrong, testified that she would have done pretty much everything the officers did, but she would have been a lot bossier about it. As much as Genevieve's 1 year with the fire department made her an expert on when a police officer should begin chest compressions, the Minneapolis Police Department's own experts directly contradicted her this week. These were, again, prosecution witnesses. On Tuesday, Lieutenant Johnny Mersil, the MDP's use of force trainer, and Officer Nicole McKenzie, the MPD's medical support coordinator, testified that it would be appropriate not to provide care to a suspect who had just been fighting with officers or in the presence of a hostile crowd. Chauvin had both those circumstances. Trying to do damage control, the prosecutor asked Officer McKenzie to define a hostile crowd. She said, quote, a growing contingent of people around if they're yelling, being even verbally abusive to those trying to provide scene security, unquote. Hey, remember those weeping bystanders last week? Their own testimony confirmed that they were yelling and even being verbally abusive. Donald Williams, for example, the bouncer and MMA lobbyist, admitted to continuously berating the officers, all of which is on tape, calling Chauvin an effing bum, bitch and an effing pussy ass bitch. In one of those tapes, Williams threatens Officer Thiel, saying, "I swear I'll slap the F out of both of you." And of course, there was the lovely Genevieve screeching, "I have your name tag, bitch." Now you know why primetime cable suddenly went back to covering COVID vaccination schedules last week. And more on this trial from Andrew Branca at Legal Insurrection. Let's see, the ninth day of the prosecution, and from the perspective of this small-town lawyer, things don't appear to have been going well for the state so far. Indeed, things appear to be degenerating for the state, and badly. Followers of this trial will remember how the state began its narrative of guilt to the jury. Lots of emotion, sorrow over the loss of George Floyd, a man struggling with demons but dearly loved by his family and community. We had an entire series of bystander witnesses still exhibiting the shock of having watched Floyd apparently die in the street. Yes, and this is singular to George Floyd. How exactly? Powerful stuff on an emotional level. But eventually the state ran out of sobbing and crying bystander witnesses, and the prosecution's narrative was obliged to begin talking about facts. And the apparent trend in my eye is that the more the state talks about facts, the more their narrative of guilt begins to closely resemble the defense narrative of innocence. From the state's telling, fentanyl had nothing substantive to do with Floyd's death. Sure, Floyd was an addict, but that wasn't a factor to which we should attribute his death, but merely another reason to sympathize with the struggling Floyd, who was, after all, still a loved human being despite his addictions. Don't pay any attention to the drug narrative. That's not what killed Floyd. Rather, what killed Floyd was Derek Chauvin's blood choke knee to Floyd's neck, or maybe it was a respiratory choke delivered by Chauvin's knee to Floyd's neck, or maybe it was a mechanical asphyxiation resulting from the pressure applied by all three officers holding Floyd prone, or maybe it was positional asphyxia because they failed to put Floyd in the recovery position, or maybe it was that the officers should have started chest compressions on the handcuffed, huge, and just violent Floyd before EMS showed up. Or maybe, does it really matter? Chauvin's knee, excessive force, not a trained technique. Unfortunately for the state, many of its own witnesses, especially its use of force of medical witnesses, whether existing MPD trainers or well-paid expert witnesses from out of town, have testified in ways that substantively undercut that narrative of the state. Even now, 9 days in, we still don't have an actual medical opinion of Floyd's cause of death other than the cardiac arrest induced by apparent asphyxia. Was that asphyxia caused by the officers charged in this case? Perhaps. Alternately, there is an equally or more likely explanation for Floyd's death. Perhaps the astonishingly high levels of fentanyl in his system and the fentanyl discovered eventually in both the Mercedes SUV Floyd was driving and the squad car from which Floyd achieved his violent escape. After all, how does fentanyl kill? By depressing respiratory function. That is, by chemical induction of asphyxia, which eventually, of course, will result in cardiac arrest, which is how Floyd died. The more the case turns to drugs, not in the hypothetical sense of Floyd's generalized and tragic lifelong struggle with addiction, but in this just tragic lifelong struggle with addiction. I'm sick of weasel phrases like that. Just minutes before Floyd died, he was in a grocery store holding a banana, dancing a jig, seemingly the happiest man alive. But we have the prosecution made an attempt today, I suppose, to mitigate the damage from previous witnesses, including their own. George Floyd, this is from the Mail again. George Floyd was displaying signs of air hunger. Police doctor tells jury drugs could not have killed him because he was coherent and fighting for his life as he was held down by Derek Chauvin. Dr. William Smock, a forensic medicine expert, told jurors on Thursday he believes George Floyd died from positional asphyxia. He said that he considered and dismissed other causes, including the defense's causes of choice, fentanyl overdose, and excited delirium. He discarded fentanyl overdose as a possible cause of death because he said Floyd was not falling into a coma, snoring, or slowing down his breathing. His testimony came straight after forensic toxicologist Daniel Issenschmidt testified that he had tested Floyd's blood and urine. Yes, now they're saying that this amount of fentanyl in his blood, 3 times overdose level, that's not even equivalent to what they get from DWIs. Oh, really? And yes, heavy drinking heavily enough to be charged with DUI, DWI, whatever they call it. Does this normally lead to frothing at the mouth? That's not my impression. But again, I am not a medical expert. Of course, we're getting a conspiracy theory now that, excuse me, that the Hennepin County prosecutors are deliberately looking to throw this case. Why? Because they want blood on the streets. Sounds outrageous, but stranger things have happened. For instance, Hunter Biden being lionized in order to save his father, Joe Biden, and allow him to be carried over the finish line. From CNBC, Peter Thiel criticizes Google and Apple for being too close to China. He's speaking at a virtual event held by the Richard Nixon Foundation. Thiel, who founded PayPal and sits on Facebook's board after making an early investment, is an outspoken voice in the technology instrument world and known for his contrarian opinions and conservative leanings. CNBC is telling you in code, pay no attention to what this man says. Oh dear, he supported Donald Trump. Thiel criticized Google for its work on artificial intelligence with Chinese universities, partially because of conversations he claimed to have had with company insiders. Since everything in China is a civilian-military fusion, Google was effectively working with the Chinese military, not with the American military, Thiel said. He also said that Google insiders told him that they work with the Chinese because they figured they might as well give the technology out the front door, because if they didn't give it, it would get stolen anyway. A Google spokesperson told CNBC, "These allegations are baseless. We do not work with the Chinese military. We are proud to continue our long history of work with the U.S. government, including the Department of Defense, in many areas, including cybersecurity, recruiting, and healthcare." Yeah, and of course, there's no possible way that any information that they learn from the United States government regarding, say, cybersecurity could ever end up in China's hands, what with Google working with China. Thiel had previously criticized Google in 2019, saying that the FBI and CIA should investigate Google and ask whether it had been compromised by Chinese spies. Thiel also said that Apple was unlikely to confront China because of its massive supply chain to manufacture iPhones and other products in the country. He noted that other big technology companies like Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft don't have as extensive business interests in the countries, in some cases, because the Chinese government has restricted what they can do there. Thiel also said that Bitcoin threatens the US dollar. Quote, "Even though I'm sort of a pro-crypto, pro-Bitcoin maximalist person, I do wonder whether at this point Bitcoin should also be thought in part of as a Chinese financial weapon against the US, where it threatens fiat money, but it especially threatens the US dollar, and China wants to do things to weaken it. So China's long Bitcoin." Let's go to James Burnham here. This will be the final installment from the Machiavellians. Now, don't all cheer at once. I'm going to have to find another book to do a deep dive. I believe, isn't that how the kids term it? Into it. This is from the final chapter, Can Politics Be Scientific? Okay. And here we go. In the light, a dilemma confronts any section of the elite that tries to act scientifically. The political life of the masses and the cohesion of society demand the acceptance of myths. A scientific attitude towards society does not permit belief in the truth of the myths, but the leaders must profess, even foster belief in the myths, or the fabric of society will crack and they will be overthrown. In short, the leaders, if they themselves are scientific, must lie. It is hard to lie all the time in public, but to keep privately an objective regard for the truth. This is so true. Not only is it hard, it is often ineffective, for lies are often not convincing when told with a divided heart. The tendency is for the deceivers to become self-deceived, to believe their own myths. When this happens, they are no longer scientific. Sincerity is bought at the price of truth. Yes, whenever you see these dramas, medical dramas, lawyer dramas about ethical dilemmas, as I said before, this is not how it works. These institutions have an ethos, and you learn what the ethos is, even before you enter it, while you're studying it. And if you have difficulties, I suppose you could say, for instance, I don't believe in trans ideology. I don't believe in what is being done to minors, both male and female. You could think this, but you will keep your mouth shut, because if you don't, you will be in very serious trouble, both in the profession and socially. So you lie. And what happens in almost all cases is that you come to believe what you had previously loathed, because it is too much of a struggle to believe one thing and to say another. There are two other alternatives, which is that you go crazy or you simply leave the profession. But back to Burnham. In the light of these obstacles and this tragic dilemma, it would seem that the possibility of scientific political action, even on the part of a section of an elite, which is itself only a small section of society, depends upon favorable and temporary circumstances. From my own acquaintance with history, I should say that these have been most nearly realized at certain periods in the history of Rome, of the Catholic Church, of the Venetian Republic, and of England. They have evidently not existed up to now in the present century. Our leaders, not only the governing elites, but those other sections of the elites, such as that grown out of the labor movement, which have been moving toward increased power, are for the most part non-scientific and even anti-scientific in their handling of major social issues, while at the same time they have adopted scientific techniques in dealing with narrower problems of mass manipulation. The programs which they profess, as well as those upon which they act, are devoid of reality in their failure to recognize the general pattern of our age. They are content not simply with myths, but with remnants of outworn myths. They admit no responsibility except to the fiction of the mass, which is only the projection of their own unloosed will to power. Proceeding in this matter, with the material resources devised by physical science at their disposal, they have brought civilization to the most shattering crisis of recorded history. Again, this book was published in 1943. Let's talk about the myths. Let's talk about the civil rights movement. Now, it was generally believed by practically all the elite, and even by a majority of the population, that if ameliorative measures were taken, in the law, in business, in society, then within, a generation, or at most 2 generations, Black Americans would rise to the level of white Americans. This has not happened. The peak of the civil rights movement, let's say Brown versus Board of Education, which was 1954, which was, that is 46 plus 21, 65 years ago. 67. But so Civil Rights Act in 1965. So we've had several generations of this. And Black outcomes, again, remain stubbornly behind white outcomes. Despite disparate impact, despite affirmative action, despite all manner of racial spoils. So has the elite abandoned its myth that all people are equal in all respects? No, it has not. It has doubled down on this. So we get Black Lives Matter, and we get cities put to the torch. I don't see any end in sight for this, and it's not going to end well. Burnham concludes the Machiavellians, it is probable that civilized society will somehow survive. It will not survive, however, if the course of the ruling class continues in the direction of the present and of the past 40 years. In that direction, there lies destruction of rulers and ruled alike. But during the monstrous wars and revolutions of our time, there has already begun on a vast scale a purge of the ranks of the ruling class. That purge and the recruitment of new leaders which accompanies it may be expected to continue until they bring about a change in the present course. Though the change will never lead to the perfect society of our dreams, we may hope that it will permit human beings at least that minimum of moral dignity which alone can justify the strange accident of man's existence. Of course, reading this in 2021, moral dignity, eh? You got to wear a mask everywhere. Sometimes, some jurisdictions, even when you're outdoors. Got to keep 6 feet or 2 meters away from everyone. You have to be afraid of everyone at all times. You have to stay home. Doesn't sound a lot like moral dignity. I guess what Burnham couldn't see in 1943 is what happened after the end of the Second World War 2 years later, that it was decided that politics would be banned. There would be one view, which would be held to various degrees by all political parties. There would be no dissent allowed from this view. I mentioned the Civil Rights Movement. You see how the conservative movement, as exemplified by National Review, took a strong stand in favor of segregation. Well, this was abandoned, in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and for a long time now, National Review has been attempting to scrub the record of its previous position. But of course, National Review, to give one example, is as woke, as they say on the race question, as any other magazine, as any other institution. Oh no, they complain about cancel culture or the like, but they have bought into, the myth that all people, and indeed that all sexes or genders, are equal in every respect. Of course, that is not a conservative view. That is a liberal view. Now, the new belief, the universal belief, the liberal Democrat, the cult of liberal democracy. Well, the Cold War ended in 1991 and the Liberal Democrats won. And by the end of the century, we heard of the end of history. Yeah, the end of history. No utopians there. In 2007, the world economic system began to crack. And in 2008, it nearly collapsed entirely. And there was a revolt against globalism after this time. But the elite is still in power. The elite has decided that, no, you can't even disagree about things like masks or vaccines now without being excommunicated, without being made unpersons. So the lessons taught by Burnham in this book about what the elite needs to do in order to perpetuate its hegemony have been completely ignored. And again, I don't like to make short-term predictions, but my midterm prediction is that unless the elite smartens up in a big way, in a real hurry, we are going to see either a collapse of the West or a series of revolutions. Let's go to the chat. Mask outdoors coming to Quebec soon, I'm afraid, says Ogan's Iron. Pitsky says, I figured you for no on Billy Joel. Has their shared bouncer gig been brought up at the trial? That's Chauvin and George Floyd. Not to my knowledge. Why would he intend to kill him? That's absurd. Yes, and why would this be a racial thing? It's not as if, Officer Chauvin and the other 2 cops involved, who are not white, by the way, it's not as if they headed into the inner city looking for victims. A call was made and they arrived. William Hicks says, dancing up a jig. Kevin, that's the picture I get of you when you just describe yourself walking, observing others wearing their masks while getting accosted by various psychotic, homeless people. Matt Beck says, I'm not a fan of George Floyd, but the actual cause of his death is not material to the murder charge. If Chauvin intended to kill him while he was ODing, that's still prosecutable as murder. Yeah, if he intended to kill him, why would he have called for medical assistance? I don't see that. That just seems to me to be really pushing out the boat too far. Intended to kill him. It just seems absurd. Of course, whenever a white man is involved in any actions which result in the death of a black man or any harm, a real or perceived to a black man, then, well, it's due to white supremacism. I mean, the QED. I think that's the basis on which the prosecutors in Minneapolis are acting on. And I wanted to mention briefly, I wish I could give this more time, a story from Tone Deaf at the Bragg Media. Songwriters for Ariana Grande and Dua Lipa asked stars to stop taking credit for songs they didn't write. A group of songwriters behind Sit songs as Dua Lipa's Don't Start Now and Ariana Grande's Seven Rings have signed a letter asking artists to stop taking credit for songs they didn't write. The open letter says that there have been a growing number of artists that are demanding publishing on songs they didn't write. In other words, theft. The letter was signed by songwriters Justin Tranter, Emily Warren, Ross Golan, Amy Allen, Savin Kotechka, Joel Little, and Victoria Monet. It says that while the writers aren't asking for revenue from the artist touring, merchandise, brand partnerships, or other revenue streams, they are simply asking for that respect in return. We are simply asking that the ecosystem stay imbalanced, asking that we are not be put in positions where we are forced to give up all we have in exchange for nothing. We're simply asking that we give credit where credit is due and only take credit where credit is earned. While the letter hasn't targeted any artist specifically, to give some context, Justin Tranter alone has written songs for Britney Spears, Gwen Stefani, Linkin Park, Kelly Clarkson, Selena Gomez, Justin Bieber, DNCE, Kesha, Imagine Dragons, Fifth Harmony, 5 Seconds of Summer, Ariana Grande, Lady Gaga, Bia Miller, Demi Lovato, and Fall Out Boy. Emily Warren has written for the likes of the Chainsmokers, Dua Lipa, Khalid, Sigrid, Melody Martinez, and Shawn Mendes. Yeah, this is a very old practice in the music industry, and it is one of the reasons why the music industry is a nest of vipers. That you're a songwriter. Now, there are musicians singers, bands who write their own songs. In fact, it used to be almost de rigueur in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But now we've gone back to the old days of the Brill Building or Tin Pan Alley. And but you see, someone like Ariana Grande, the amusingly named Ariana Grande, well, she is an artist. She's not merely a singer. Frank Sinatra never claimed any publishing credit on the songs that he sang, and people then and did regard Frank Sinatra as a great artist. No, but Madonna and Ariana Grande and Dua Lipa and all the like, oh yes, they write songs too. Well, do they now? Do they now? There's a joke about this, and it's called Change a Word, Claim a Third. Oh, where the line, it says, she did that, she did this, then I laughed. I think that should be, she did that, then I laughed. Oh, well, that's definitely worth 1/3 of the publishing credit for this song. This is almost universal. Well, I shouldn't say that. That there are still some people in the music industry, as there have always been, with integrity. But let's look at Elvis Presley. So we're going back to the 1950s. Let's look at Heartbreak Hotel. That's a smash from 1956. It was written by Tommy Durden and Mae Boren Axton. That was Hoyt Axton's, the actor and singer-songwriter's mother, with credit also being given to Presley. how did Elvis Presley get a 1/3 publishing credit on a song he didn't write? Because Colonel Tom Parker put it to songwriters that Elvis will not record your song unless you do. And I could find many other. Oh, yes. Don't Be Cruel. Still a popular song. Written by Otis Blackwell. But 50% of the royalties and the co-writing credit went to, wait for it, Elvis Presley. And it goes on and on and on. So as I say, this is an old practice, and it seems to me to be a criminal practice. So much of what goes on in the entertainment industry is criminal, but for some reason, the politicians, the jurists have looked the other way. I don't know, perhaps because they like being in the company of people from the entertainment industry, perhaps because their campaigns get large contributions from people in the entertainment industry. So I am now going to move on to Theater Thursday. And I have to say that watching this movie, The Vast of Night, which was directed and co-written by Andrew Patterson, it cheered me up. And I'll tell you why it cheered me up. Because it demonstrates that it is possible, it is still possible, for good movies to be made. I won't say come out of Hollywood, because this movie did not come out of Hollywood. It was an independent production that was paid for by the director and co-writer, Patterson, out of money that he had made directing TV commercials. This movie cost $700,000 to make. It's difficult to describe just how little $700,000 is when it's now routine for movies to cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make. And this is even before the hundreds of millions in advertising. $700,000. This is, as mentioned earlier, Patterson's first film. And with a budget like that, it has a cast of people that you have never heard of. The male lead is played by an actor called Jake Horowitz, and the female lead is played by an actress called Sierra McCormick, who is 23 years old. Now, I'd never heard of this woman. I did some research on her, did an image search, and what was really curious to me is that you see the pictures of her from her other, teen-involved productions, and she looks like a typical vapid teen star, but she does not appear at all vapid in this movie, and I guess it goes to show what direction can do. Also, costuming, makeup, and the like. This movie is set in New Mexico in the 1950s. When in the 1950s? Well, we know it was after Elvis made a splash, so that would put it 1956 or later. A curious thing about this movie, and I have to think that this must be deliberate, that much of the movie takes place in a radio station, in a small town radio station, Cayuga, New Mexico, called WOTW. Now, the director, Andrew Patterson, is from Oklahoma City, and he must know that all American radio stations east of the Mississippi River begin with the call letter W, but all American radio stations west of the Mississippi River begin with the call letter K. So I can't explain this anomaly, Perhaps, I mean, it was deliberate in the sense of showing the unreality of the situation. Now, despite the minuscule budget, great care has been taken to show us a small town in New Mexico in the 1950s. Now, of course, I was not an habitué of such places, but I can say that I have seen so many movies which purport to be set in the past, and so many things jump out at you as being wrong. This movie was, as I say, it was independently done, financed by the director, and Patterson took it he offered it to various film festivals, including Sundance, and I believe it was rejected by 18 film festivals. What were they thinking? Well, I'll tell you what they might have been thinking. There's no pause in this movie. There's no nudity. There is one four-letter word uttered in the film. It's unfortunate to me because it's not necessary. I understand why it was done, to demonstrate that Horowitz's character is tremendously disturbed and frightened at the time, but I don't think it was necessary. This is a very white movie. There are no black characters seen on the screen. We get a lengthy talk from an ex-soldier, a black man, and it becomes obvious from the time that he starts speaking that he is black, and he later identifies himself. And he later talks about having been dragooned into a secret U.S. Army or operations which used only black and Mexican soldiers. Why? Because if we said what we had seen, nobody would believe it. That seems perfectly reasonable to me. In this movie, you see it's young people, mostly. But we do have a bunch of adults. And the adults are dressed and speak much as I imagine they would at that time and place. There's no attempt by them to, look hip or youthful or to speak the same language as the teenagers. And there is Horowitz is, he started off in radio, and he's something of a hipster. And he has devised seemingly his own lingo. I can't say that I recognized any of his snappy patter, which is quite amusing, and it's a credit. It's a credit to the movie. Let's see if I can. Let's see. You sound like a mouse being eaten by a possum. I quite like this too. That's going to cause some crosstalk eventually, right? I mean, won't it? And Horowitz's character, Everett Sloan, says, "Read the Bible, Sam?" And he says, "Yes." There's your answer. Answer to what? Answer to everything. That is quite good. Yeah. But you see, these teenagers are respectful to adults, as teenagers were in those days. And they are not constantly trying to score points off them, particularly in public. And we've had no end of this for decades, and it is expected for every young person on a TV show or in the movies to constantly be humiliating their parents by pointing out how stupid, boring, ridiculous they are. And there is none of that in this movie because America was different, Ben. I suppose more different than people can imagine. Before I get into the plot of the film, I should say that this is a very romantic movie, and it's romantic in several ways. Well, it is called The Vast of Night. And, the movie takes place at night. And it's dark out there. Sometimes it's dark indoors. And the night, the dark, is romantic. This movie is about the telephone. And we see before direct dialing, and direct dialing was a revolution in the way that the telephone was used and understood, because before direct dialing, you had to speak to an operator, and the operator knew who you were speaking to, which made it more difficult to plan actions that, should we say, were illicit, either formally or socially. Just, all sorts of people get involved in embarrassing situations which are not illicit, but they don't want their private business to be known by strangers. And before direct dialing, again, you had to deal with an operator. And there is something romantic, even magical at the time, at the idea of hearing someone's voice from miles away, or even hundreds of miles away. Something romantic about that. And something else that's based on the voice is radio. And radio is a very romantic medium. You get something, I'm going to be talking about Kraftwerk on Monday. And Kraftwerk made a record. When did it come out? In 1974. It was their follow-up to Autobahn, and it was called Radioactivity, or Radioaktivität. And it is about the romance of the radio. It's also about the romance of nuclear power. But Kraftwerk disavowed that, like all of the Germans. And think of it. There's something terribly romantic about sitting in a room, say, and there's a box there, and it is, bringing you the sounds of the Palm Court Orchestra at the Regent Hotel in whatever city. Live music, recorded music, people talking, delivering you the news. And this movie delves into that romance very powerfully. Everett, he's in a small town, in a dirt town, and he's just starting out. But he's got the bug. He loves radio. He's very ambitious, and there is a lot of humor in this film. And a lot of the humor has to do with Everett explaining to Faye Crocker, who is played by Sierra McCormick, that show business is based on lies. And Faye is a naive 16-year-old. And she's surprised by this, and she's outraged. Why did you tell that man that the tape recorder had stopped working? Because you don't want to talk to him. Why? Because he's a dud. And he's explaining to her, the newfound wonder of the tape recorder. I'll get to that in just a minute. That he's explaining to her, just ask a question. Ask any question. It doesn't matter what you say. People want to hear what other people have to say. That is to say, if they're speaking about things that interest them. For instance, there's a running gag in it about a power failure due to a squirrel biting through an electrical wire. And then we hear, it was actually a chipmunk. Well, tell us what you think about chipmunks. And it sounds inane, and it is, but it's the sort of thing that people like to hear. And Faye snaps at Everett. Why do you sound different on the radio than you do in real life? Well, because the kind of regional accent that Everett Sloan has is not the kind of regional accent that is going to be successful on the radio. Because radio DJs, they lean towards the universal. They're supposed to be appealing to all. And that's why they have and are trained actually in schools to have these phony voices. Another romantic thing in this film has to do with technology. Technology that was new to the time. I mentioned the telephone. Telephone was, what, 30 years old. Mass telephone usage, about 30 years old. And radio, again, about 30 years old. Now, you could call Everett in this film, you could call him a nerd. Well, there have been nerds in America for a very long time. I mean, the Wright brothers were nerds, if you will, bicycle nerds. But Everett comes from the noble high school tradition of the AV club. The people who, worked the projectors and all of that sort of thing. And they had their own kind of community. They are tinkerers. They get a tape recorder. And what can I do with this tape recorder? How can I modify this tape recorder? Can I get this machine to do more than it's supposed to, more than is in the specs? Now, magnetic tape. The Germans invented magnetic tape during the Second World War. They also invented stereo recording. You think that they would have had more important things on their mind than inventing stereo recording and magnetic tape. But now they were doing lots of things at once. And a German tape recorder and some tape was seized by the Americans at the end of the Second World War. And amusingly enough, yes, magnetophone was the system. And Bing Crosby, one of the great Americans of the 20th century, both as a singer, as an actor, always wanted to be at the cutting edge of technology. And he heard about this, and he invested in a company called Ampex. Bing Crosby can be considered as the godfather of high-fidelity recording, because before magnetic tape, recording was, well, to put it bluntly, crummy. It was only with the invention of magnetic tape and with machines that could play magnetic tape that it enabled recorded sound to resemble that which, well, is real. And we are introduced not only to the the antiquated telephone technology of Fay Crocker, but to the antiquated radio and recording technology of Everett Sloane, with those horrible walls, with the dots in them to muffle the sound. This all seems very quaint now, but it was all new and exciting in the 1950s. There is some boy-girl romance in this film. This film is romantic because it's about an adventure. It's about two young people who find themselves in the middle of an adventure. And they'd known each other before, but they find themselves close, and they find themselves helping each other out. And this brings them close romantically. When Everett says that, he has big plans for the future, and of course he's going to have to leave Cayuga, New Mexico, you just see fleetingly this sadness on Faye's face, because she is, imagining a romance between them. I'll tell you another reason why I like this film so much is that it is not shot like almost all films are shot today, with these other disgusting over-the-top color palettes, or color palettes in which all the color has been drained away, as if you're in I don't know, a lunatic asylum or something like that. This film is done in widescreen, such that you get one of the things that I love so much in films, which are lens flares. Of course, lens flares are, they're a type of mistake, if you like. They are artificial, but I think that they are very romantic. There are very long takes in this film. And so if you're the kind of person who demands, oh, I don't know, 40 cuts a minute, you are not going to like this film at all. You are going to be bored to death. There's fair warning for you. But this is kind of film is what they call a slow burner. It starts off very quotidian, and then something strange happens, and things get stranger, and two people are drawn together into something that seems bigger and bigger. And I love that in a film. There's a bunch of set pieces. There are two astonishing tracking shots in this film where we leave the radio station where Faye works, and we are catapulted down the streets, through fields, through lawns, the parking lot of the high school, into the high school, and up the bleachers. And then we see it in reverse. It's really remarkable stuff. There is a scene where we see Faye with a close-up on her. I guess it's a medium shot, where we see her with her old-fashioned headset on. And she's taking calls in the old-fashioned way, pull out the RCA jack, put it in somewhere else, as she's trying to piece together this mystery. And long shots build tension. Tension is good in a film, and this movie has lots of tension. The color palette that is used is rather diffuse. I think that it is quite effective. Now, let's get to the plot here. I should explain something about the circumstances. This would be well known to people of my generation, but lesser and lesser known to younger people. Of course, the United States emerged the greatest power in the world after 1945, and the United States had not been smashed, as Europe had been, by World War II. But there was a tremendous amount of unease in the country for the reason that the United States didn't actually stop being at war after the defeat of the Germans and the Japanese. That America was in a new war called the Cold War. The detonation of the atomic bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki shocked the world. When I say shocked the world, well, you have to understand that it really shocked the world. People use this word shocking all the time, but this was genuinely shocking because it posited the existence of a new world which could end, that man could end. So that was a tremendous source of unease and fear. There was also the fear of Soviet infiltration, communist infiltration in the United States, which was real. Joe McCarthy was right. Now, an atomic war or later nuclear war would be different from other wars in the sense of, well, the silent killer being radiation. Well, chemical weapons were not used in the Second World War. They were used in the First World War. But gas can be seen and radiation cannot be seen. And the prospect of being eaten away quickly and horrifyingly by an invisible agent is, of course, very disturbing indeed. You see, after the end of the beginning of the 1950s, you see the rise of the UFO movement, the belief that intelligent aliens had discovered us and were monitoring Earth. Now, it's my own belief that the UFO phenomenon was the result of the horror of the Second World War, following the horror of the First World War, that the human species had been found to be inadequate, perhaps at a most fundamental level. And so aliens They're always smarter than us. Well, usually smarter than us. Of course, there is a part of this myth is the idea that there are malevolent aliens as well. There is no evidence, none whatsoever, of alien life. In fact, the prospects of alien life are almost infinitesimally remote. But you had this tremendous belief. Why? Escape. The possibility of escape. Perhaps mankind was doomed and the human species was damned, but there are other places in the universe, many, many other places, and perhaps it would be possible to start over then. Or alternatively, that perhaps these aliens, like the ones in the day the Earth stood still, perhaps they could impart their greater wisdom to us, so that we would not be as homicidal as we have been. So we have strange noises being heard. The whole town is at the local high school basketball game. There's no one on the streets. They're truly deserted. And one of the things I liked about this movie is, again, this feeling of the existence of a community. That, what do these high school basketball games mean? They mean nothing, really. I mean, none of the athletes there are going to go to the pros. Not that the NBA was much of anything in, say, 1956. It's just these were their boys, and they were playing. And it turns out they record the games, and they play them the next day. And the play-by-play is really funny because it's dreadful. They get played on the radio. And people who hadn't seen the game, but everyone in town has seen the game, so they're listening to it again. And why? Because they like to hear their son's name mentioned on the radio. Anyway, Faye becomes alerted to the existence of this disturbing noise over the telephone, and people being cut off. Callers coming through your number and then click. And this happens again and again, and she hears this noise and she thinks that this is odd. So she contacts Everett, who's on duty at the radio station playing his highway hits, and tells him about this, and he is intrigued by this. So let's hear the noise. And he thinks that this is indeed strange and worthy of investigation. And he plays the noise and says, perhaps the 5 people listening, he makes that joke several times, perhaps one of the 5 people listening could call in and give some information. And he does get a call. Gets a call from an elderly black man who tells him about the experiments or the cover-up that he was involved in. This was a matter of national security. And what does he think? He thinks that these are aliens sending sophisticated radio messages to Earth. And later, we are amongst the few people who are not at the game. We start to get some panic from people who claim to have seen lights. An old lady calls from the neighborhood, and they go to visit her. I think that the screenplay stretches itself a little too thin at that point, because the old lady starts talking about things which are really not necessary. Talking in this philosophical way about the nature of man. I don't think, it works, but I don't really think it was necessary to stretch it out that far. So then it's a question of whether these aliens are real and what do they want. I won't spoil the ending for you, but this movie reminds me of a couple of other movies that came out in the last couple of years. One would be The Witch, and the other would be Horse Girl that Alison Brie was in. And there seems to be, a longing for transcendence in these movies, in an escape from Earth, in the way that I was speaking of earlier. There's a delightful framing device in this film, which is that it is shown to be a television show of the 1950s. And we see it in one of those ovoid-shaped TV monitors. And the film begins in bad quality black and white, with the screen shifting. And there are several occasions in the film, and I thought this was quite brilliant, where we have people, talking on the radio and the screen goes completely black, in order to bring home the fact, how strange this still seemed. That how can you talk to someone who is not in the same room with you? But we get this is called paradox theater, and we get an imitation of Rod Serling. You are entering the vicinity of an area adjacent to a location, the kind of place where there might be a monster or some kind of weird mirror. These are just examples. It could be something much better. Prepare to enter the scary door. No, actually, that's from Futurama. But you get a long introduction to this episode, which is, it's kind of loving mockery of Rod Serling. And, the kind of seriousness that you got from dramas like that, the kind of seriousness that was mocked at the time, of course, by Alfred Hitchcock, whose show Alfred Hitchcock Presents and Alfred Hitchcock Hour were pretty much coterminous with the Twilight Zone. He was, mocking the form, and he was mocking the idea that, this is a TV show and there are going to be commercials. But this, it is set up, this movie, very much like a 1950s dramatic serial, where you very clearly have three acts. Well, and they're separated, not by commercials, but by a very simple visual effect. I started off my review by saying how thrilled I was by this movie, both by its quality, but again, it's possible for good movies still to be made, and on a shoestring budget. As David Bowie once said, ideas don't cost anything. So those are my thoughts on The Vast of Night. Excellent movie. So let's take a final look at the chat. Hikma Warrior says you can make a great film with an iPhone, a good script, and a basic video editor. Did you edit tape, Kay? Did I edit tape? I used to edit cassette tape. But that's the only type of tape I have edited. Okay. He also invented Fanta, says Ogun's Iron. I suppose it's a reference to Bing Crosby. What is it with Germans and their problem with nuclear, says Ogun's Iron. Very peculiar. German, French are huge into nuclear. Well, the Germans seem to be, all one thing or all the other. Oh, yeah, we all hate nuclear power. It's agreed. We all hate nuclear power now. I suppose we can mock that, but the people of Alberta are very much like that. Oh, we're all conservative now. No, we're all the Reform Party now. Yeah, you see that in the way their governments change. You get these near absolute majorities, parliamentary majorities, followed by near absolute parliamentary majorities for a different party. Okay. I think that's it for saw a recent article that described Madonna as a songstress. William Hicks. Yeah, was it Madonna? What did she sample ABBA and Coldplay sampled Kraftwerk or vice versa. Get your own songs. It's not like this isn't like a mashup like the Dust Brothers, with the Beastie Boys or Beck. This is no, we're going to make this the melodic basis of the song. Well, then it's not really your song, is it? Okay, so coming up next week on Theater Thursday, a documentary from 2021 by Adam Curtis, a multi-part documentary called Can't Get You Out of My Head. On April 22nd, I'm going to be talking about the Oscar-winning best film Bong Joon-ho's A Parasite from 2019, a TV serial from 1980 from Germany by Rainer Werner Fassbinder called Berlin Alexanderplatz, and on May 6th, Doug Liman's 1999 comedy Go. Tomorrow on the book club, I will be discussing a dystopian novel about fertility or the lack of it. Entropy, I suppose you can say. It's called The Children of Men by P.D. James. On April the 16th, I will be discussing The Dictatorship of Woke Capital by Stephen Sukup. And as previously mentioned, on April the 12th, on Music Monday, I will be presenting Krautrock, a primer. That's the show for tonight. I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like to show any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to donate to this live stream, very much appreciated, especially at this juncture in my life. My PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, you can make a donation to this live stream directly via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this: in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.